Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my Try a Story Tag 2020 for various short story collections. This tag was started by Jen Campbell a few years ago. I'll link her channel down below. The point of the tag was to read one short story for however many collections as you'd like, and then decide which of those collections you'd continue to read through to completion. But that's not how I've really been doing this tag for the last couple of years. I will link my own short story playlist down below. I've been using this tag to very slowly make my way through a couple of collections, one story at a time, basically. It can be difficult to read short story collections. They're not as propulsive as novels. They can be uneven. People aren't talking about them as much. So this is just my little way of slowly giving some credence to short stories, especially in July, which is my birthday month, because I also write short stories after all. But I think I'm going to start off on a negative note this year, be a cranky pants, when I talk about the story I read in this one, which is the vintage book of contemporary American short stories edited by Tobias Wolff. And perhaps appropriately, the story I read is called The Vintage Thunderbird by Beattie. And it's about a group of friends, like in their 20s and 30s, who mostly live in New York and have really badly defined friendships slash desire to be sexual relationships with each other. There's just all of this constant wanting for things you don't have and for people you don't have. And none of these relationships are at all healthy. There's one subplot involving two of the friends, one of who comes to New York to stay with the other friends because she's escaping her partner and wanting to have an abortion. And I mean, to me, I think what's bothering me a lot about this is just there's not enough empathy for any of these characters, and abortion is a huge, complicated issue. And I think all Beattie is trying to say is, look at these pathetic people and how New York is a really horrible place to live. Like, you know, the main character gets mugged twice, and I have no idea why, except possibly to say New York is an awful place to live, or to create an allegory with his friend who he's been in love with for 7 years. She's really rich, and she owns this vintage Thunderbird, and near the end of the story, she gets ripped off and selling it, and maybe that's supposed to be like the same as being mugged, but that seems really lazy. And I mean, there's even the line about the protagonist telling this woman with the Thunderbird, "You're my oldest friend because I've known you for 7 years." So, you know, I guess that's also commentary on how empty and shallow these people's lives are. But there's just so little empathy and just, you know, going around and around these, you know, pathetic characters and their relationships to one another that it just didn't work for me at all about describing the human condition or anything. I did not like it very much. Here I have Great Short Stories by American Women, edited by Candace Ward, and I've been using this Virginia Woolf bookmark in it for the past few years. And I just read The White Heron by Sarah Oranjewet. I like this one a lot. I could see the realist naturalist, I say pinings because, I mean, it's obviously there in the language that she's describing this rural Maine atmosphere of the mid-19th century. The story takes place on this farm in rural Maine where the main character Sylvia is living with her grandmother, tending to their poor assets, and they come upon, or actually a hunter comes upon her. He, you know, talks about being an ornithologist who's fascinated by birds, but then, you know, he kills and stuffs them. So there's this interesting relationship between Sylvia and the hunter because she is kind of drawn to him. There's this emphasis that she's, you know, on the cusp of womanhood. So, like, will she be taken out of this rural, like in the middle of nowhere existence? And also they have this shared love of birds, although Sylvia can't quite get into his mindset of then wanting to kill the birds. And the hunter particularly wants her to help him find the nest of a white heron, the bird that he's been pining for and wants to add to his collection. And she does know where the bird lives, and he even offers a good amount of money to find this nest, and that would help her and her grandmother out a lot. So at one point, after she and the hunter spend a day together, she sneaks off in the early morning, and she like climbs a tree, and there's like really interesting imagery, almost like her hands are like talons, like she's a bird herself, and she is able from the height of the tree to discover where the heron's nest is and what the heron's behavior is like, so that she really could help this hunter find and kill the bird. But when she gets back, she finds she just can't do it. She can't give up the bird's life. And I guess I was certainly hoping for that, and it seemed like from the language that Jewett was doing that maybe she was going in that direction, because she still kept referring to Sylvia as the girl, or the child. So I'm like, well, maybe she's still more in her child phase than her woman phase of saying, okay, I'm going to do what the man tells me to, sort of thing. And I have to say, happy it ended up that way. It just seems like, there's absolutely no humanitarianism to, killing and stuffing birds. And the way that the naturalistic atmosphere was presented made the birds and nature seem, so emotionally resonant. Like, why would you, kill these creatures? Why would you do something so horrible, I mean? So I think it ended well. This is the shortest story I've read so far in this collection, My First Love Affair and Other Stories by Sholem Aleichem. Aleichem is most well known for writing the stories that led to the musical Fiddler on the Roof, but he was also a very well-known and renowned writer beyond that. And this story I've read in this collection this year is Birth, which takes place in the town of Kozrelevka, which is the same as the other stories I've read. It's kind of like Anatevka. And it's about this young woman, Razel. It starts with her giving birth, and then we kind of go back in time. A lot of the emphasis is on the fact that she is completely alone in Kozrelevka, or largely because her husband has gone on to America, and he either died at sea or he, started a completely new life. Nobody's heard from him since, so it's like just he's considered to be a schmuck or just bad luck, whatever. And she's living, I think, with some neighbors, and her grandmother's around to help with the birth. And basically all her neighbors talk and gossip about her, and she's terrified in giving birth, and her parents are both dead, and so there's all this talk of, well, if you get through this birth, oh, God willing, you'll be rewarded with a son. But then when the son is born, all they can say is, oh my God, he looks just like his father, it's like a curse. And there's all sorts of other comedic commentary on the sort of interpersonal relationships in the town, like the way that the women start arguing about who's going to make chicken broth and whose fault it is that it hasn't been made already for the baby and the mother. And then the men get in a big tizzy about who should, be performing the circumcision and having like the biggest roles in the circumcision, and then it comes to a head, and they're all really happy and just enjoying the celebration of this new life. But poor Razel is all alone, and it ends on quite a really sad note where she's nursing her baby, who looks like this husband she hasn't heard from in forever, and she's just alone and sad. So I think this is a lot of his commentary is about using humor to say that it doesn't take you away from the sadness of life. But this is like a rather sad little ending, a very short and sort of almost brutal tale in a sort of way. Not brutal, but really shows more of the sadness, I think, than the complexities. This next anthology is Oi Karumba. It's an anthology of Jewish stories from Latin America, edited by Ilan Stavins. So far, well, I'm in early days. I'm still in Argentina at the beginning of the alphabet, and I believe most of these authors, or certainly who I've read so far, are all immigrants who came from Eastern Europe sometime in mid-20th century, and that's the case with José Rabinovich, who wrote the story A Man and His Parrot. It's a very short story, only like 3-4 pages, and it's told from the perspective of Manuel, who is a man who's unemployed, and his wife is the breadwinner, and he is very bitter about everything that this entails. It entails that he has to do all the domestic chores and that she has a lot more control over the money, and he is bitter, bitter, bitter about it. We're just in his head while he's winding up a storm, just getting, you know, ready in the morning to do his duties while she's getting ready to go to work. And then through the course of this whining, we hear that he has a parrot who screeches out to him, "Master, master, master!" And that's another source of contention, but it's also a source of him trying to take back control over his life, in that he is deciding to starve the parrot, I guess just because he can, and I guess because bitter people are cruel people, I guess. He's not entirely starving the parrot because his neighbors are around and they're already laughing enough at him and this screeching parrot. So he's like feeding the parrot a little bit, but withholding all water and just hoping to starve the parrot out. And that's his life. Until at the end of this like little story, he goes upstairs and he sees that his wife has been sewing baby clothes. And from there, he rushes back downstairs to feed the parrot some water. And to me, this gives off the impression that the thought of having a legacy, of having a child, makes him have, you know, more faith or pride in his life again, and he decides he doesn't need to kill a parrot to, you know, feel better about himself. One would hope. There are not some great characters in these stories I've read so far, a lot of jerks, but I'm glad this got a happy ending. And finally, I have My Father is an Angry Storm Cloud, collected stories by Melissa Reddish. If you watched my last Friday reads, you know this is actually a collection I intend to continue with and not put off reading story 2 for another year. So I read story 1 just now. It's called Roadkill. And as a disclaimer, Melissa Reddish and I went to college together, so I feel more awkward even trying to analyze the story, I guess, but here I go. There's sort of a twofer to this story. There's a second-person sort of retrospective of what it's like to run over animals by accident in cars, and the feelings of different ones, of what it's the physical feeling and of running over different types of animals. And then the other story is a third-person, more usual type of story about a young girl who returns home after a liberal arts degree and a couple of like dead-end jobs, and now she's living back at home with her parents and really clashing with her mother, and her social life mostly consists of going to like a fast food place and hitting on a server there, and the server ultimately invites her to a party where they have a really bad hookup. And so those are the two stories that are interdispersed. And I guess my thought is immediately is that Casey, the protagonist of the third-person story, is kind of like Roadkill herself, you know, in that she's washed back up into her hometown from childhood, where her interactions with people are basically have a lot to be desired. Her mother more or less treats her as a failure, and this guy she has sex with, it's just, you know, an awful hookup that is meaningless, and he turns into a leering asshole afterwards. So that's my thought. Other than that, especially the roadkill scenes, but all of it are like just such visceral detail about the physical and emotional experiences of each. You know, the roadkill parts are more esoteric, like more about feelings and fleetingness than, you know, the tighter narrative of the third-person one. But I still liked it a lot, and I'm looking forward to continuing with this. So that about covers it for me now. You can find links to all of these collections, their Goodreads pages, down below. I hope to be back in a couple of days to squeeze in a quick author's answer video about my own writing life. But in the meantime, thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.